and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm PRWeek's news editor, Siobhan Holt. Today I'm joined in the studio by three comms professionals from two leading agencies based outside of London. We're joined by Citypress's Executive Chairman Charles Tattersall and Chief Executive Martin Currie, and Jane Ainsworth, Managing Director of Birmingham-based PR agency WPR. Last year, WPR won the Best Agency Outside of London accolade at the PRWeek Awards, and Manchester-headquartered agency Citypress is also an award-winning PR agency, having won the same award in previous years, as well as achieving gongs in PRWeek's Best Places to Work. Thank you all for being here today. Dare I ask, how was the journey?
Dreamy.
Yeah, we know where Twickenham is now.
That's good.
Yeah, we found it on the map.
Park the horse and carriage outside.
Super quick. Even quicker when HS2 opens, I suppose.
Yes, fingers crossed. As I'm sure our listeners have already guessed, the focus of today's episode is to take a closer look at trading outside of London and analyse both the benefits and the challenges. So let's begin. To start, could you give a brief history of your agency? Citypress, do you guys want to take it first? Who's going to go? Charles?
We've been around for a long time. So the business was founded in the 60s, so one of the first agencies to be set up outside of London. And where we are now, we're 120 people. Annual revenue is about 15 million. We have offices in Manchester, London and Edinburgh, where we work for clients right across the UK. And we are employee-owned. So in 2021, we turned into an employee-owned company, which has been great, big part of our journey. So that's in a nutshell.
So WPR is just over 30 years old. We were founded by Willoughby Public Relations by Julia Willoughby in the recession in the early 90s. And I joined her about 5 years later. Grown enormously since that time. We're now a team of just shy of 60 people with a fee revenue just over 4 million and working for clients all over the country.
Brilliant. And how would you say business has been then in the last 12 months?
Unpredictable. But it's not surprising when you look at the state of the world. Everything is unpredictable. And I feel like I just can't call it from 1 month to the next. I went into this year super cautious, thinking it's going to be a tough year, tighten the belt, prepare the team for the worst. But against everything the headlines are saying, our new business inquiries are very significantly up on this time last year. So I'm perhaps slightly more optimistic and a little confused.
I think you're right, Jane. If we compare the final quarter of last year to the first quarter of this year, I mean, night and day in terms of difference. I mean, for us, last year we grew revenue around about 10%, which is broadly on plan for us, maintained profitability. So we were pleased with that, but it was a lot harder fought than it has been previously. So we managed to get the outcome that we needed, but my gosh, it was a lot tougher. But similarly, I think as we've stepped into this year, there definitely feels to be a greater degree of confidence amongst clients in terms of propensity to spend. A little bit more ambition with clients wanting to do fun, different, bigger, better stuff. And we weren't really seeing that at the back end of last year. So that's been a big swing this year. And then I guess last year for us was a big year of investment too. So big bets on AI, on public affairs, our first kind of creative director, which we'd not had previously. Big investments in talent. So that's what the year looked like for us. And I guess to Charles's point, being employee-owned, regardless of what the economic indicators are quarter to quarter, year to year, when you're owned by colleagues, you think so much longer term when you're independent rather than being a listed company. So we're not worried about quarterly earnings. We're trying to shape a business that's going to be fit for purpose in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So I guess we're just still thinking longer term, and the year to year stuff, yeah, we think about it, but we don't agonise over it too much.
Looking at the focus of this podcast then, what are the benefits to trading outside of London, do you think?
It probably sounds obvious, but overhead, I suppose, is a key benefit. Our cost base is lower, so that probably makes us more competitive in the marketplace. And I think for a lot of agencies, we occupy a bit of a sweet spot in terms of size. So sounds a little cliche, big enough to cope, small enough to care. And I think that's how we can pick up clients who have been with larger agencies and have felt they haven't got the personalised service that they necessarily wanted. So will come to us. And certainly as a Midlands-based agency, I think location is a key advantage for us. We can be in a quarry in Leeds in under 2 hours and in central London in 2 hours. And that has a benefit for a lot of clients, particularly clients who've got big chains of things, big chains of pubs or care homes or housing developments, whatever that might be. They like how mobile we are and how we can be, if there's a crisis breaking out somewhere, we can be there. If we need to film a TikTok somewhere, we can be there quickly. So there are a number of advantages I think we have seen and continue to see.
And are your staff in the Midlands?
Everybody is based from our office, which is just outside Birmingham city centre.
And what about you guys? What do you think?
I think all of those reasons, yes, having your fixed overheads a bit lower in terms of property costs and that kind of thing is helpful. But I think increasingly there are broader benefits. So there's a point of difference really in the market. So obviously the majority of the industry is wholly based in London. So I think having more diversity in terms of talent is important. So on two counts really, I think clients want people who represent their customers or their audiences far better. And I think having people based in London, in Manchester, in Edinburgh is helpful from that perspective. I think it's also advantageous from a recruitment perspective. So we're increasingly seeing people who maybe spent most of their career based in London who want to return to where maybe they're brought up and lived. So people moving to the regions. And it means that we've obviously got access to that talent. So this sort of migration that's happening a little bit away from London is helpful. And I think that's been accelerated recently through some of the changes that the big marketing services groups are making, whether that's moving to 4 day a week and being less flexible about their working arrangements or through mergers and all of the fallout that happens through that. So we're seeing at the moment huge amounts of strong talent in the market that are looking to base themselves outside of London. And I think we're taking advantage of that. Certainly some of the hires that Martin's mentioned on those specialist areas, they've been people who are actively relocating.
I agree with that. I think there are people that moved out of London but could commute into London when the flexibility was more prevalent, and now you're being expected to be in the office more. Then definitely people are saying, ouch, that's a lot of money to spend on train fares apart from the time. I mean, so we've definitely noticed that talent benefit.
I think, I'd agree with that, Jane. Over the last kind of 2 weeks, we're interviewing for consumer brand director at the moment, and we've seen 6 candidates all at director level, all leaving either an IPG, an Omnicom or a WPP agency for precisely those reasons. Flexibility that was afforded to them before is less certain now, and actually they've shaped their kind of lifestyle around that flexibility and now need to safeguard that. We're initially nervous about thinking, all right, well, are there any good big agencies outside of London that are doing similar kind of brand defining work for big brands on big budgets, doing cool stuff? And, the feedback we've had has been, we didn't know there were agencies like this headquartered outside of London.
Which is frustrating in itself, isn't it? It's great to have those people looking at us, but frustrating that they weren't automatically aware of who we were.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated because I'm writing about you guys. So what are they reading? It's my question.
Just need to write more about it.
Yeah.
I get told that all the time. We'll come on to that. But yeah, so I did actually wanted to drill into that though. So are these members of staff that are originally from outside of London that want to return, or are they Londoners that are looking for maybe moving to a different part of the UK?
There's a couple of things happening. I think in many instances, it's people who were born and raised in the regions and nations outside of London, went to university, maybe in London, or got their first jobs, built their careers in London, and are getting to an age now where, from a cost of living perspective or from a demographic, when you start to think about young kids and you might actually want a space outside and something that's a bit more affordable, and then beating a retreat, if you like, back towards where there's a support network. That's definitely one feature. Or it might be that their partner wants to move back and therefore they're moving with them. That happens quite a bit. And then actually, at a slightly earlier stage of career, some people who've done their first 4 or 5 years in London and actually now at like mid to late 20s thinking, actually, I think there's a different way of a different kind of lifestyle. I'm thinking about someone who we just recruited who's joined our social team and has moved back to, not even moved back to, chosen to live in Sheffield because it's beautiful and very commutable to Manchester for lifestyle reasons. So there's a bunch of things going on, I think.
Yeah. Would you say that you guys get a lot of people commuting from different parts of the UK into your offices as well?
Notably so since the pandemic. We used to recruit people from a very, very tight radius. And yeah, we have people travelling from Yorkshire now, the East Midlands and Herefordshire, I think, as well. So yeah, it's broadened enormously.
Yeah, and we're still really relaxed about where people live. I mean, certain roles you need them to be more office based than others. We do 3-2 like most agencies, but we've got a number of people who work almost exclusively at home, and they're the right people for the job, and the job doesn't require them as much to be in the office. So yeah, it's interesting that the industry sort of, the big groups are moving in a certain direction, but I think when you're independent, you can be far more flexible. And I think people that work in this industry want that. So I don't think there's ever been a stronger time from a talent acquisition perspective for us as an independent sort of regionally headquartered agency.
There is still the lure of London, though. We're really committed to bringing young talent into the industry, and you can find they'll do a year with you and then they do want to go and do that spell in London.
Yeah.
But I'm proud of the agencies they go on to. I'm like, we've done a good job. They're flying there as well. So there are some downsides to it, but I think overall I agree with you. We've reaped the benefits of it.
And actually this is the benefit of us. So we've had a London office since 2006, and what we find is that people might do a couple of years with us in Manchester and then they'll move to our London office, and then eventually they might move on. But having the sort of flexibility to have an office for different people to move to, I think is quite helpful.
Yeah. Do you think you'll ever expand further?
You never say never to anything, but it certainly is not the cards. It is something we looked into about 15 years ago. I was trying to, on the way down, think, when was it, dating around children? It was something we looked into. And at the time, which I don't regret at all, we decided that rather than invest in opening an office in London, we would invest in really growing our, what we would call then digital capabilities, but expanding our social media credentials and making sure that we were ready to take advantage of those opportunities, which I don't regret for 1 second, although I can see the advantages that you're talking about. It is there to all to see. So I would never say never. Anything could happen, but it's not in any business plan for the foreseeable future.
It's interesting. I think some regionally based agencies think, I know what we'll do. We'll get a post office address, or we'll get one desk in a WeWork. Hello, London office. It's very easy to do that, but it doesn't really make a meaningful difference. There's only any point, in my view, opening up in London if you're going to scale a team in London, because you need to build a similar kind of ecosystem of people and skills, rather than just have one lonely person sat in a
it can't be a satellite office.
It doesn't work that way in my view.
It really doesn't. So again, you can look at just saying, or we can just have a London address on our website. But if I firmly believe that we can do amazing work from the Midlands, I'm almost downplaying that by having a sort of faux London address to cling on to.
And clients will see through that anyway.
And what was the driving force behind you opening the London office?
Well, to be honest, Siobhan, I mean, when I think back to us, in the 90s, when Charles and I were first starting out with Donna, another board director and former major shareholder, our view at that point was we needed to become a national agency to compete, to scale. But the way of us doing that was through opening up multiple offices rather than just pretending we were a national agency. So we wanted to become national by default of being UK-wide. So that was really the strategy, and it was driven mainly by client demand, whereby a couple of clients who took a big bet on us back in the day and scaled with us and wanted us to represent them in different parts of the UK. But one client in particular, a large financial services institution, just said to us, guys, you're going to have a bit of a presence in London because, you're a big part of our comms network now, and we need a team with boots on the ground here.
There was also a financial imperative because we were spending so much in travelling, because most of our work is in London. But it just happens that a lot of our people are based outside of London. So back then, I think we were spending so much money on travel, and it was disruptive that we needed people actually close to where clients are.
But when I think back to how we did it, it was on a real shoestring. So we took a serviced office on Lombard Street. I bought a pinstripe suit and walked around London with an A to Z, trying to figure out where I was. And then gradually we scaled a bit and hired our first 1, then 2, then 5, then 10. Made a bit of a bad move and took a fixed term lease on an office in Shoreditch, which seemed cool at the time. Transpires we were in the worst part of Shoreditch.
We outgrew it really quickly.
And it was very hard to build what we had in Manchester from a vibe point of view, in such a small office. For us, being part of a bigger co-working community, so we're in Uncommon on Liverpool Street, 10, 15 businesses in there, fantastic, communal areas, brilliant amenities. You feel like you're part of something bigger rather than having, 10 people stuck in an office and at the wrong end of Shoreditch. So that would be my warning.
I'm interested to know where the wrong end of Shoreditch is now. I used to work there.
I'll take you for a pint around there.
But going back, so how many people do you have in your Manchester office, in your Scotland office, and your London one then? How is the split?
It's about 85 Manchester, 25 London, and then about 10, 15 Edinburgh. So that's the broad geography of the business.
And what would you guys say are saying the areas of growth and outside of London, so regionally and PR specialisms?
For us, it's no different to the comms agency just writ large. I don't think there's any faster or slower parts of the industry that are growing in regions. Definitely for us, corporate advisory work is a really big part of our business. So that's continuing to grow, but creative campaigning is still big demand for that.
Growth in social, paid social. I know you do quite a lot of work in that area as well. Like you said, that's where you've invested. So
content creation is big for us at the moment. I think the number of platforms, social platforms, has exploded, and then the number of formats on the social platforms has expanded, and just being able to give clients cost effectively enough content to feed the algorithms, it's a huge ask. So we're investing a lot in that, and have seen enormous growth, particularly I think since the explosion of TikTok post the pandemic. What I would say from a business point of view is probably the further away you are from the consumer at the moment, the more money you potentially make. Certainly our B2B division is growing very significantly. Engineering and manufacturing is being really strong for us over the past few years, although the recent ONS statistics did point to being a drop in engineering and manufacturing, but it's not reflected in the performance that we're seeing. But I think you're right. I don't think there's necessarily different regional trends. Oh, I did discover at a recent PRWeek event I went to that tech in London has been hit hard over the last year or so. It's not really a sector we're particularly exposed to, so we haven't seen that. And then I think consumer clients are in kind of two mindsets. Some are very nervous, saying we're going to watch what we spend on marketing. Others are saying we're still really ambitious. The only way we're going to grow is by stealing market share of a competitor. So we are really going to go for it on a marketing front.
Yeah.
And they're the dream clients.
But I don't think comm services are particularly bought on a regional basis. I think maybe years ago they used to be, and we do some pan-regional work. So we work for some clients where we deliver UK-wide campaigns, and obviously from a public affairs perspective, you have to be close to stakeholders. But I wouldn't consider, we don't have sort of any regional briefs as such for clients.
Yeah, I mean, on some infrastructure projects, it might be a stakeholder mapping engagement kind of piece around that, but the vast majority of brands that buyers are buying us to represent them nationally and or pan-regionally, but not single regionally.
I see what you mean. Would you agree with the statement that the industry is too London-centric? And if it's a yes, how do we change that?
I'm going to change your question to be a bit broader, which is the industry diverse enough? And by diversity, I think the big issue is kind of social mobility and diversity. So I'd say on that basis, no. I think when you walk around agencies, they are quite homogenous. There's a lot of people who work in the industry that don't come from wide enough backgrounds. So we're working really hard to try to change that. So I don't really see it as a sort of regions or north versus south or London versus the regions. I think the whole industry needs to be a lot broader in the type of talent that it's bringing in. And there's a certain type of people that go into this industry. We'd like to see people from different backgrounds, certainly kind of more working class backgrounds who perhaps don't realise the opportunities that the industry provides for. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, to go back to your original question, is PR too London-centric? I think it's a broader problem. I think the country is very London-centric. So I think it's home to 15% of the UK's population, but is responsible for 25% of financial outputs. And I think that is perhaps the failings of successive governments. We talk about levelling up, then we just bury levelling up. We talk about this huge investment in HS2 that's going to connect Manchester to London in lightning speed, and then it's going to be a very small train trip that's going to stop outside London. And who even knows, the plan keeps changing. So I haven't really got the answers to it, but I do think that there should be serious pressure on governments to say, we need to spread wealth and equity across the country much more than we currently are.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I guess the approach that we took was recognising that whilst that would be a nice outcome,
it's going to take decades. Even if someone commits to it, it's decades.
And it requires, successive terms of governments to deliver that kind of swing. So I guess we just thought, well, let's try and win both games. So we'll have a regional presence and get the gain of that in terms of talent pools and social diversity and proximity to client office and having this pan nations and regions service that we offer. But let's also scale a business in London. So for those brands and businesses that just think, I need a team that's going to be based in London, well, we've got one. So we felt we just had to win both games, really.
Yeah, but I think clients are a bit more curious now about outsourcing their requirements or agencies that are based outside of London. I think they see it as an advantage, because they themselves are trying to kind of become, talk to different audiences around the country. So I think, we're competing pretty well against London-only agencies.
We are. I mean, and we tend to find that on most pitch lists, we're the kind of rank outsider because we're the only non-London headquartered agency pitching for that brief alongside 4 of the London headquartered firms, which we love because we like Vikings. We like the element of surprise. So that really gives us a point of difference.
True. Yeah, we have been told with a wild card.
Yeah.
And I don't,
so I'll take that. I don't mind being an underdog.
Is it a compliment or an insult or both? I'm not sure, but okay. At least we're in the mix.
Yeah, but I think it's like anything. If it's perceived as a weakness, then turn it into a virtue and a strength. And I think that's what we do with it. Yeah, I think that would be my view. I would say, though, in all honesty, for those brands and businesses that are headquartered also outside of London, it's often the comms buyers and those businesses that have their head turned by London-based agencies and thinking, I just need a London-based agency. Because they're not in London themselves as an in-house comms team, they actually do get a little bit, sometimes have their head turned by, and we've lost out on a brief just recently, in fact, from a business that is based outside of London, and just felt we weren't a London only agency, and felt that that's what they needed because that's where everything happens, isn't it?
Yeah. Whereas London-based clients are far more amenable to using agencies that are headquartered outside of London.
What is the biggest misconception then about agencies located outside the capital?
That we don't use a knife and fork, or don't we have legs?
I think it's that we don't represent really big brands, but you look at our client book, if you take, we're very strong in the food and drink sector, so we represent 4 of the top 10 biggest food and drink manufacturers in the UK, really big brands. And there's a sort of surprise that, you do that sort of when you're headquartered in Manchester. It's like, but it makes no difference where you're based these days. And I think geography's flattened. I think post-pandemic, the fact that people are working and living everywhere, just as it's leveled the playing field a lot. I think we feel far more able to compete now than we've ever done.
And I think really, if you think about it, within agency land, we're all doing the same thing. Broadly speaking, we're offering the same services. Some agencies have a little bit of IP or some tech or a cute proposition or whatever it might be, but ultimately it's talent and clients that you need in agencies. So the difference between doing good or doing great is really talent. You know what I mean? And if I look at our senior bench in Citypress, it's ex-Golin, ex-Weber, ex-Fleischmann, ex-Edelman. So we've got big agency talent. And therefore, but it's sat in a different kind of proposition.
And the difference is that there is less people turnover in regional agencies. Haven't got a stat to prove that, but we know it anecdotally. So because there's so many options if you work in London agency land, you can move from agency to get promotions. People tend to stay. Don't know if you find this in your business. People stay a bit longer. I'm
with you. I haven't got the stats to prove it. But yes, experience and common sense would say that is the truth. You can't hop around agencies as often because there just aren't
as many. There's not as much liquidity, I guess, in the talent.
But that has the benefit for clients because it means that one of the things that I've always believed in is that clients want really strong service. So I know our industry talks a lot about creativity, talks a lot about strategy. The reality is clients want high quality service from their suppliers, whether you're using a PR firm, an accountancy, a law firm. And I think it's often the big frustration that they get account handlers moving all the time, whereas actually it's a real advantage for us that we've got people who really understand our clients and our sectors, and they don't move around as often, which means that the knowledge is always there. So,
just to play devil's advocate on that, though, do you think then that the training may be lacking, possibly, if someone is moving around various agencies and building up that experience versus maybe someone that stays in a role and doesn't move up? Could there be that argument, would you say?
Well, it depends on whether the agency is committed to learning and development. We're really strong in that area, so we invest and commit a lot to it. And I think we've been pretty successful over the years in the PRWeek Best Places Award for Learning and Development. So we recognise that we've got to throw money, time, effort into that in order to improve the quality of all of our consultants. So, I think if you're moving around a lot, yes, you will acquire maybe a bigger network. Yes, you will kind of come into contact with potentially more clients over the course of your career, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll progress quicker, generally speaking.
I think agencies get the talent they deserve. So if you're not investing in your L&D, if you're not rotating your talent around different clients to get different exposures and different experiences, then your talent will leave. I just think it's easy to think, there's a big supply of talent in the market at the moment. That's good for agencies. You just have to invest in your talent to give the best service to clients and to make sure they retain them, because good talent will leave a bad agency. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think when you're a growing agency, you are bringing in new senior talent, so people have always got fresh perspective and insights to learn from. A lot of good training does happen in the boardroom, wherever the training course happens to be. That is absolutely true. But by shadowing different members of your own team who've got very different backgrounds, insights, perspectives, I think you can learn as much as if you're just hopping agencies every 6 months, really.
Plus, if you're growing, I guess you're always bringing fresh talent.
Yeah, that's the critical thing.
I mean, that for us has been pretty transformative. When I think back to the real trigger moments in our kind of 25, 30-year career working together in Citypress, it's often when we've brought in some senior talent from another big agency, it's really opened our eyes to how this thing could be done differently, and we've brought in reasonable change as a result of that. So you can still do that if you're growing. You can still bring in that fresh.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it can be anything from just a really small change operationally to a whole new why aren't you taking advantage of this great service out there? I can help you develop that.
Yeah.
But you do need to be growing to keep bringing in that talent, and we're lucky we have been growing over the past few years, so we've been able to do that and have reaped the benefit.
Just anecdotally though, I mean, I went up to Manchester to do a Women in PR event, and I halfway through thought I'm going to ask a question, and I asked how many had actually trained or worked in London, and I'd say about half the room put their hand up. And I say that as a journalist as well that had to move to London to pursue her career, that there does seem to be a bit of a tendency towards that. Not everyone, I know that's not everyone's experience, and obviously you three, it's not your experience, but that there are those that feel they have to do their stint in London.
But I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I've got 3 teenage daughters, and I'd love for them to spend some of their early career or even later career living and working in London, because it's an amazing city. Let's be clear. It's a phenomenal city. And to experience it as someone who's working there and living there was, for me, it was a gift. I lived here for about 5 years. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think if you're an agency that's either wholly or majoritively based outside of London, you've got to have a strategy for that. How do you retain that talent and bring it back, or give it somewhere to work when it's in London, or
if they want to move parts of the world, parts of the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
We're talking about cities here, but there are other regional parts,
indeed.
For example, that maybe you want to still pursue your career, but it might be very hard to do that at a big agency.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time when people move to London in their kind of early mid-20s, I don't think it's necessarily because they feel their career can't be fulfilled by working in the regions. It's just because London is a fantastic place to live. It's a draw. It's a great city. It really is. And I think there's a sort of thing, if I don't do it in my mid-20s, I'm never going to do it, which I can see, because once you bought your house outside London, it's very hard to then sell up and live somewhere infinitely smaller inside London. And I totally get it when people tell me they're in the team that they're moving to London. I wish them nothing other than the best of luck and go and have a fantastic time, because what a city to be part of. It is brilliant. So I understand it, but I don't think it's career-driven a lot of the time. It's sort of lifestyle and just life experiences focused.
Yeah.
Can I ask then, has anyone ever been judged by a client based on, say, your accent or where you're from?
Probably less so, Charles.
Well, I'm called Charles, and my mum was an actress, so it meant that I wasn't allowed to have an accent growing up. So I'm from Southport originally, which is fairly close to Liverpool. So all my friends spoke with a Scouse accent, but I stood out in the 70s and 80s as the kid called Charles with a posh accent. And they always used to say to me, Charles, how's Diana? Because this is in the day when Charles and Diana were together.
Okay.
So I think I wanted to be called Wayne back then, or Jason, or some cool name. So fortunately for me, I don't think I've ever been judged. I mean, I'm state educated, don't come from a particularly privileged background. But I never felt judged. I think probably more judged in the early days, when I think there was more of a gap between a Manchester-based agency in London. So there was an occasion, this is years ago, where Martin and I went to see a potential client, and they said, how can you do PR when you're not based around Fleet Street? And we felt like saying, mate, Fleet Street doesn't exist anymore, even in those days. So I think there was a little bit more sort of prejudice. But now I think it's actually better. I mean, you listen to the BBC, most of the accents are northern, right?
Yeah,
because
they are.
They've made a huge effort to try to diversify that. So I don't know. Martin's from Middlesbrough, so you probably had a different experience.
Yeah, I had it tough. So being brought on Teesside in the 70s and 80s through state comp was a lot harder than Charles's upbringing. But I'd say I left Middlesbrough when I was 18. So I've lived outside of Teesside for the last 30 odd years, nearly twice as long as I lived in it. But I would say in the early days, I was really conscious of it, if I'm completely honest. So when I was first rolling around London back in 2006, when I came to London, to university in London, I remember being the only northerner, and I was like a curiosity. Do you know what I mean? It was great. I was super popular because I just had this, I was just unbelievably northern. But I was conscious of it professionally, probably in the early days, particularly because we were doing corporate advisory work, doing a lot of work in financial services, and I just felt in many rooms I definitely had the wrong accent.
It's also our age, because I think we were responsible for the business in our 20s, and felt that we had to sort of act older than we actually were. Yeah. We're going the other way around now. We're trying to be younger than we actually are.
Wearing white trends.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to look cool. Failing.
Yeah. Well, I'm born and bred in Birmingham, but apparently my accent doesn't always suggest that. So I've been told by a few people there's a Brummie girl wandering around Surrey, looking very confused as where her accent came from. And I'm not too sure where mine came from. No, I haven't been judged for my accent, but I can see all the things that you've said. I think the work done by BBC and other broadcasters just to make all accents just equally relevant, I think that's had transformative changes on social mobility. That's overstating, actually. It's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think we've also benefited from the fact that Manchester's pretty cool now. So, I mean, we're not going to have the argument about the second city unless you want it.
Well, I always think it's a terrible thing to fight over. I'm like, just have it. I mean, I don't want to go there. Yeah. No, but I think, yes, Manchester is perceived as perhaps a cooler city than Birmingham maybe. But, Peaky Blinders, it's all on the up now.
But I think that kind of means that the sort of Mancunians, got people with Mancunian accents. I think clients embrace that. They love it. I think that there's very little prejudice that we see day to day.
Exactly. And I love all your accents, just as an FYI.
And yours too.
Thanks. My broad Greater Manchester accent that is not going anywhere, even though I've been down here for a very long time. I think we've slightly touched on it. So as we're marking 5 years now since the first national COVID-19 lockdown, what do you think's changed in comms? And do you think actually, we're talking about the work-life balance there, do you think it's actually benefited your agencies in a way? The sort of, with people wanting to move back, and could that have been one of the push factors, do you think?
Definitely. How was it 5 years ago, firstly? That has just completely flown by. And I think when we were in the darkest times of pandemic, when furloughing people and all that was going on, it was hard to believe that anything good would ever come out of it. But personally, I think the hybrid working is great. And I think, yes, it's certainly enabled us to attract talent from a far wider area than we ever used to. But I think it's been really good for the comms industry too, because when all hell broke loose back in 2020, I think it propelled comms up to board level conversations where it may have struggled to been previously as well, because comms was tricky. There were just so many messages put out to so many people that was so difficult, and we're changing absolutely all the time, whether it's internal comms or you're a retailer trying to convince people that your store is really safe, so please come back to shop. I think it accelerated the reputation of comms at the time as well, but there have been
It's funny when you look back on periods of history, it's one of two things is happening when it comes to big change events like this. Either there's a pendulum swinging and then it swings the other way, or there's a change that happens and stays changed. Do you know what I mean? And I do think the whole people's relationship with work, I do sense that is more of a pendulum. I do think that that's coming back the other way a little bit. And I don't necessarily mean that edicts being issued by leadership teams of big agencies demanding people come back to the office. I mean more that, I certainly noticed this in our place, there's a really big contingent of people who are loving spending time in the office together. Because it's fun. It's way more fun than working from home.
Age specific? Are you finding that maybe in a younger demographic or not?
I'd say it's sprinkle. I think it's probably more prevalent, more noticeable in a younger demographic, definitely. But I mean, like Fridays in our office are great. The beer fridge is open from like lunchtime.
That might be maybe
that's a beer fridge.
But I love that. And I think when I was like some of my best days, when I think back to when we were in business together in our like early to mid 20s, Like, we were in the office every day, and like you kind of didn't want to go home because it was fun being in the office.
Yeah. Well, I remember it being a luxury to have a day in the office and have no meetings, because most of our time was spent on the road seeing clients. And quite frankly, there were periods of time where it was absolutely exhausting. Yeah. Constantly being out of the office. So for me, the best thing about the pandemic, almost the legacy, is that I think it's brought us closer to clients, because I think we were in the trenches with a lot of our clients that we're still working with now. Technology introduced, but obviously Teams kind of came about, and all of our meetings are now on Teams. So you feel more close to your client because you can see them. Don't forget, before the pandemic, most of the calls were on audio calls. We didn't video conference. I think it's actually kind of made work more interesting.
I think there's a bunch of things. I think leadership teams have understood actually demanding that your team is present and visible 5 days a week is just very old-fashioned and not necessary. So I think that's definitely. I think
if you're a business that's not doing well and you don't have a great culture and you're performing badly, it's very easy for a leadership team to say, right, let's get them all into the office
and think that's the solution.
It definitely isn't.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that. If you have a great culture, it can not just survive; it can flourish with hybrid working.
Yeah,
but you have got to have that great culture at the heart of what you do.
How many days in the office are you guys at your business?
2. Yeah. But I think what's happened, and it's happened very gradually over the last few years, is that more meetings, more shoots, etc. have all gone into the diary. So people are out and about much more than they were even 2 years ago, which I think is great.
And it does help the diversity argument, in like a pretty meaningful way. So if you're neurodivergent and you just find being in an office 5 days a week way overstimulating, well, that's fine, because you can work from home 2-3 days a week and do really good focus work that way. Or alternatively, if the cost of your commute into central Manchester or central London or central Edinburgh is really high, and you're having to do it only 2 to 3 days a week rather than 5, that makes a meaningful difference compounding over a month or a year. So I think that's another good legacy of it.
And we work really hard to make sure that the office days we have, so we have every Tuesday everybody's in, then everyone has to do a team day every week as well, but we make those days useful. So we do organised learning and development on those days. We do presentations to people. We get outside people in. We coordinate a lot of client meetings on those days so that lots of people are around. So I think that's the thing that a lot of businesses haven't really nailed yet, is kind of making sure that if you're in the office there's a meaning and purpose behind it. So that's
and actually, if you're far better trying to convince people to come back to the office more than they are doing, if that's your challenge, by giving people FOMO than issuing diktats, because it's just going to destroy the culture. So that would be my view.
And just, we've touched on it before, but obviously Omnicom is set to acquire IPG, which owns the likes of Weber Shandwick and Golin. I'm just interested in what your views are, because obviously Weber does have quite a big base in Manchester. What are your thoughts on this giant?
Well, interesting, we're talking to a lot of candidates who are ex-Weber, or currently in Weber, because I think some of that work is now happening in terms of the merger. And so that's flushing out talent in the market, and we're just having discussions with a lot of that. But I genuinely think you could look at this 2 ways. Gosh, it's going to create this monolithic organisation, but I'd view it as a massive opportunity for mid-sized indies, as I like to call us. Do you know what I mean? Because I just think we've got massive agility and a real point of difference. And I just think that represents something very different from a client proposition, who might not want to be part of an enormous stable where actually 4 or 5 of their competitor brands might also be.
And actually some of these agencies outside London are actually really quite small, and a lot of the work that when they're part of a network, and a lot of the work they do is effectively for the kind of mothership. It's not like they're winning independent work, and it's effectively North Shoring is what's been going on. But I don't think really outside of London there are any real networked agencies of any great scale. When you look at the regions, it's independent agencies that are the sizable operators. So in terms of the sort of merger, any fallout, I don't think it's going to have a huge effect to what's going on in Manchester and other regions.
No, I don't think so. I think I agree with you. If anything, we'll see some small benefits from it. I think the benefits of working for an independent mid-sized agency will come to the fore again. And I think there are lots and lots of people who want to work both with and for independent agencies, because we're agile, flexible, we can make decisions really quickly. It hasn't got to go to New York for a decision to be made about someone's promotion. It can be just made that day. So I don't envy them the task either, because that's a beast of a project to undertake, merging those two businesses whilst also maintaining service delivery. It's,
you talked about the pendulum swinging. I think the pendulum is definitely swinging to independence, because I think when the economy's booming, the big networked agencies, global agencies, tend to do really well out of that. I think when the economy gets tougher, you look historically, that's generally when independents perform better, because we can make decisions without being constrained by shareholders, to your point, Jane. So, I think we're feeling pretty optimistic over the next few years.
Brilliant. And talking about looking forward and looking ahead, what are your sort of predictions then for the next year? You've obviously said that you've invested quite heavily in AI and public affairs in recent years. Are they sort of the areas of growth?
Yeah, I think every year we make a couple of bets in terms of what are the either sector-based expertise that we want to bring into the agency, or what we call specialism. So some of those more niche kind of areas of comms. But we see public affairs as a pretty important growth area for us.
We brought in Director of AI and Innovation, and it's an area where we're making massive investments, because we know that it's going to completely change how we operate. It's going to change how clients ultimately procure comms services. So that's our big bet, effectively. And I think all agencies have to invest in it fully. And it's not just a case of, signing up for a few ChatGPT sort of pro licenses. I think you've got to go a lot deeper than that. So we think the future of agency might be actually providing a lot of software services to clients. So actual kind of comms solutions based on platforms. So that's a whole area that we're kind of, going into at the moment.
When we say invest, I think that's partly tools, but mainly on training, because we've got to get a team of 120 people really efficient and proficient across a number of different AI tools. So that's definitely one big area. But we'll still look at other areas of service that we feel that would be complementary and additive to what our current services are. So it's another year of investment from that perspective, from our perspective.
What about you, Jane? Been trialling anything in AI? You obviously mentioned manufacturing being a key area.
Yes, we've got a number of clients operating in that sector. AI, we're probably earlier on in the AI development phase than you guys are. So introducing a few tools, but I think we've identified a couple of areas where we really need to grow our expertise in the next 12 months. We're not using AI at all in relation to recruitment at the moment. So that's a big objective for the coming 12 months. And I think there are just smaller ways that we can use AI as independent agencies. I tested Crystal Notes, which you guys have probably come across, just in terms of new business, and ahead of meeting people, it profiled me and it was spooky accurate. So I think we haven't got the cash to do huge investments in AI, but we continue to test it and look where we need to be scaling up as an agency. So it's something that's very much got our eye on.
Which is what we've been told at some of our PR 360 when we've had experts on. They've sort of said that it's not go big, put it everywhere. It's sort of trial it, see where it works in your business. And I think that's really sound advice.
And I think the current, which I'm not saying this will last forever, the current comforting thought is that once a quarter we do go and test AI, at least once a quarter, test AI, write a press release, write a proposal, come up with an idea, write a content plan, and it's currently dire. So I think we can take some comfort from that, but looking at where AI can tangibly help, not just client delivery, but operational delivery as well.
I think it's one of those areas where you need a strategy, a long-term strategy, but the plan has to be very short-term. So I think you've got to have a really agile plan that I'm happy if the plan that we're delivering on AI is different, literally kind of quarter to quarter, because the pace of development in this space is so fast. I think you almost need to think long-term with strategy, but short-term with planning, because the change is so quick. So you've got to stay really adaptive and really agile in my view, because otherwise you can make some pretty expensive bets that don't come good.
Perfect. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks so much to Charles, Martin and Jane for travelling to come on this week's podcast and for sharing their insights. Thanks to you for listening. Tune in for next week's episode. Goodbye.